Remember that Mr. Albanese went into the Labour Party and was in the Labour Party until he took the leadership in the hard left faction. In other words, that's the one which is closest to the old Communist Party. Israel has been involved in 10 wars, about one war every, I think, 7 years or so. A small country has managed on every occasion, to rebel. As we all know, Mr. Rudd made some really outrageous statements.
Welcome to Spectator TV Australia. I am your host, online editor Alexandra Marshall, and today I am joined by the wonderful Professor David Flint from the Australians for Constitutional Monarchy. David, welcome to the show.
Well, I'm delighted to be on the show again, and wonderful to see you, and you are looking really superb.
Well, David, you gave me a little sneak peek of your column that's coming out this week. Now, I believe you referred to President Donald Trump as one of the greatest leaders that the West has known. You are a man of history, Professor Flint. What has made you call Donald Trump one of the greatest leaders in history and put him in the likes of Reagan?
He has a wonderful instinct as to what a leader should do, particularly the leader of a major force in the world, and in this case, the leader of the West, the world leader of the West. And he has an exceptional understanding of what he should be doing, and that is using his strength to persuade the other side not to often go to war. And he follows that ancient Chinese maxim that the supreme art of war is winning conflicts without actually fighting. And he follows that as far as he can. The corollary of that is, if you have to go into some conflict, it is minimal. You avoid large land forces. You certainly avoid a land war if you can. And that's the way that you not only win that conflict, you also maintain the empire over a longer period. To an extent, the British seem to go into that, in that from the Napoleonic Wars, from 1815, and thereafter we had the British century. During that period, the British avoided land wars in Europe, except in the Crimea, but certainly land wars on the center of Europe. And they had smaller struggles out in the colonies, but they maintained that position, and that maintained their strength. So much so that people were very wary of the power of the United Kingdom, that it was respected. But that power was rarely used, at least in the center of Europe. And in relation to the colonies, many of those came into the empire because they saw the advantages. Now, President Trump seems to understand that, and I think he does it instinctively, probably because he has such a long experience in business and life. And what he has achieved is something which completely eluded many of his predecessors. Once the Americans accepted, they came out of isolation, and they accepted that they had to take the world role. They had to be the dominant power in the world. They had to take the place that the British wanted to give them anyway. Churchill was anxious to bring them in, and they came in after the Japanese invaded the Americans. And they did not seem to realize that what they had to avoid was being the world policeman. They couldn't control every problem in the world. They couldn't write everything. They couldn't make everything a mirror image of the United States, as they tried in Iraq. So you got this understanding that what you did was you maintained existing structures if you could, and you avoided land wars. And at the end of the Second World War, that was unavoidable. Once the Japanese invaded the American territories in Hawaii, the Americans had to come in. And once the Germans foolishly also declared war on the Americans, they had to come into the European war. But what they realized, and it was MacArthur and Truman who realized this, was at the end of the war, when they occupied Japan, they then saw the advantages of keeping Hirohito in power. If Hirohito, who belonged to an empire which was very old, greatly respected by the Japanese, if Hirohito were not tried as a war criminal, as the Australian government strongly wanted, if he were not taken from the throne, as the Australians and the Russians wanted, if he were kept there, Japan would probably go very quietly and they'd be able to develop Japan into a Western country, which they did. It was MacArthur and Truman who did that. But unfortunately, later, the Americans made the serious error of trying to turn countries into mirror images of the United States. They did that in Afghanistan when they had the opportunity of restoring the king of Afghanistan, Mohammed, who presided over Afghanistan in what everybody agrees at that time was a golden period. And they took him away, and there was a general view that he should be restored when the Americans triumphed in Afghanistan. The Americans foolishly put in other people. They didn't work. The regimes were corrupt. And you have the situation that you have today in Afghanistan. And similarly, they did a similar thing in Iraq. They did it also in Iran. In Iran, having undermined the Shah. The Shah was the great Western ally in the Middle East. And the Shah, through his white revolution, liberated women, enriched the country, developed industry, developed great infrastructure throughout the country, and made Iran a wonderful, strong country. They undermined him. It was President Jimmy Carter who undermined him because Jimmy Carter didn't like the authoritarian rule. It was quasi-democratic, but it was authoritarian. It was authoritarian because in 1953, because of a previous government under Mossadegh, who was more democratically elected, not perfectly, but more democratically, Mossadegh was going to take the country to the left and take it away from what it was. And the Americans and the British engineered a situation where the Shah became the authoritarian ruler. Later on, you had Jimmy Carter attacking what his own government had previously done, not supporting the Shah, not allowing the army to support the Shah, dealing with the predecessors of the current regime and letting it go, letting it fall into the hands of the present rulers of that country.
This is the very familiar, what we call unholy alliance between the black and the red. That is the communists and the very reactionary people or strata.
Let me take you back, Professor Flint, we talked about the idea of averting war and averting conflict. Now, when we're talking, of course, about Donald Trump's preemptive strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities, which are widely held, not only from intelligence, but from the Iranian leadership itself, to be very close to the development of nuclear weapons. Now, this is not just about conflict between Israel and Iran or America and Iran. Is a strike like this about also ensuring a more global peace when you have Iran as an arms trader, an arms dealer with Russia, helping it to wage war against Ukraine in Europe and destabilizing Europe, and also supplying China with oil through its large pipelines and deep water ports into China's deep water ports? That makes it easier for China to engage in the Pacific. So does taking out Iran help to avoid a larger war, or was this really a regional conflict?
No, it's not really a regional conflict. It is wide, as you rightly say. The world is divided into some people, many, many countries in the middle who are not sure which side they should be on or are rotating towards one side. But the essential players in the world today are, on the one hand, Western civilization, the most advanced civilization that the world has ever known, of which we are obviously a part. We are an intrinsic part of that. On the other hand, we have an axis of powers, all authoritarian. Some call it the axis of evil. They are all authoritarian, they are run by dictators, they have all agendas which involve taking other countries, and that is the Beijing, Moscow, Tehran, Pyongyang axis. This is an axis of powers. Some refer to it, as I say, as the axis of evil. They're certainly opposed to our way of life. They certainly would not tolerate in their countries the freedom that we enjoy, for example, in this, and the freedom that's enjoyed in Western Europe, and the freedom that's enjoyed in North America. Now, the world is divided that way, and Iran is one of those countries involved. Not that the Iranian people, it's in no way a criticism of the Iranian people. This is a dictatorship which is probably detested by the great majority of the Iranian people. And I would certainly say it would be disliked by the women of that country, certainly the women who wish to be liberated. There may be some women who don't want to be liberated, but the women who want to be liberated detest that regime. If you go back and you look at photographs of Tehran under the Shah, you see fashionable women, you see a society which is very advanced, you see people who are happy, because quite often you can tell in some countries where there is an unpleasant regime, a really unpleasant regime, and there is a terrible drabness and there's a certain unhappiness, which is manifested in the people's faces when you go there. And Donald Trump knows that he is leading the West. He knows that there are conditions of belonging to the Western Alliance. He's established what I suppose is probably the Trump doctrine. All great presidents have their doctrines, and his doctrine is that he expects all members of the Western Alliance to pull their weight, not to be parasites, not to be, as unfortunately our government is demonstrating itself to be.
Picked up Jim Chalmers and given him a bit of a shake to see any loose change that falls out for our defence capabilities. And there's not much there because Chalmers has already spent everything in the Treasury. Professor Flint, you touched on the idea of regime change. Now, I've got a few clips here of America because America has been very clear that this is not about a regime change. Have a look at this.
The order we received from our commander-in-chief was focused, it was powerful, and it was clear. We devastated the Iranian nuclear program. But it's worth noting the operation did not target Iranian troops or the Iranian people. Iran's nuclear ambitions have been obliterated. Many presidents have dreamed of delivering the final blow to Iran's nuclear program, and none could until President Trump.
I'm sure America would not be upset if there was a regime change in Iran, David, even if they are not planning one at this point in time. Now, I heard that the son of the last Shah of Iran had returned to the media and had started making some comments. I think I have one here that I can read out. Yes, here we go. He said, "The Islamic Republic has reached its end and is collapsing. What has begun is irreversible. The future is bright, and together we will navigate this sharp turn in history. Now is the time to stand, the time to reclaim Iran. May I soon be by your side." Now, that is the son of the last Shah. Is it possible, or do you think it is likely, that with America's help, we may be returning to a new age of the Shah in Iran?
Well, firstly, in relation to President Trump, he is avoiding calling for regime change, although he would like to see it. And it's again part of the instincts of President Trump, which I think make him a great leader. He's not going to try and force it himself. He's not going to lead it as occurred in Afghanistan, where they didn't go ahead with the one person they should have put in, that everybody who knew anything about Afghanistan knew was a golden period. The deposed king who was still available, it was towards the end of his life, and he was a very fine man and he would have united the country. There's an advantage, I suspect, in Arabic and in Muslim countries in having some form of monarchy. There's a great respect for having a single ruler, a person who's there, and it works very well when you have some sort of constitutional monarchy. Morocco is an excellent example. Morocco is probably one of the most successful of the larger Arab states because it has not had a terrible revolution where the army's taken over and the country has been ruined. It is still proceeding very well because of this institution which brings together the people. Now, in Morocco, the king also has a role in the religion of the country. He's the commander of the faithful, and the royal family claims a relationship, a descent in relation to Muhammad. Now, that's not going to be the case if the Shah is restored. What will happen there is that the monarchy on restoration will be secular, and Reza Pahlavi, the son of the last Shah, has made that very clear. It will be a secular monarchy, not a religious monarchy. It will be democratic. Those are the conditions he's put on it. He hasn't said it has to be a monarchy. He says that there should be a transition period after the people rise or the regime collapses, whatever happens which overthrows this regime. The danger, if the present regime did collapse, is that elements of that regime would attempt to restore something like it. It could be just as bad or even worse than the current regime. What is needed is something new. And if the former or the son of the Shah, the Crown Prince, heads it in the transitional period, and he's made this very clear, in the transitional period, he suggests 100 days, there would be discussions and subject to the conditions that the new government would be democratic. Subject to that important condition, he says, well, it's for the people to decide whether there should be a monarchy or not. There would be a great advantage in having a Shah back, not as authoritarian as the previous Shah, but certainly giving a leading role in relation to the new government, but a constitutional system which allows something to emerge where the people actually choose the government of the day, but there is within the country leadership above politics through the person of the Shah. There's nobody else. Nobody else is emerging as a prominent leader of the system. The son of the Shah has been around from, I think, 1979, from the overthrow of his father. And he has been pushing this gently from his base in the United States. He has not ever proposed that the monarchy be immediately restored. He suggests this period of transition when the people make their decision. And I wouldn't be surprised if they decide that they would like to have his ultimate leadership.
Well, not only that, Professor Flint, but the last time there was a Shah of Iran, and a Western aligned Iran, it set Russia and China back a fair bit because let's not forget Iran has been performing military exercises and signing treaties and goodness knows what with China and Russia, and of course, by extension, North Korea. So it would definitely change the scales in the current global order. Now, you talked at the beginning about limiting war, about limiting battle. I haven't heard anybody talk about this, so let me just run one of my ideas by you, David. It was only a couple of weeks ago that Donald Trump went to the Middle East and he signed a $2 trillion worth deal for AI and defense between Qatar, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia. Now, I suspect that some of that money might have been an understanding to stop those three nations from intervening in anything that might be happening in Iran, because not all of them like Israel particularly a lot, but they've all been very quiet since America's strike. And $2 trillion is a lot of money, as is having a solid relationship with a growing West. What are your thoughts about Donald Trump using a deal to limit potential war?
Well, I think that could well be the case. The Arab countries, the Sunni countries, do not like Tehran because they've seen how the mullahs have been misbehaving and what they've done to the people of Iran and what they've done to other countries. And they can see that Iran has imperial ambitions, not only in relation to Israel, and the United States, but in relation to the whole of the Middle East. And I think that they were probably silently cheering what's happened, what Mr. Trump has done there, but they're not going to come out and say it. He, as you will recall, instituted the Abraham Accords, which is consistent with what you referred to in relation to his negotiations concerning artificial intelligence. Now, he built up this network of treaties between Israel and the Arab countries. Remember that Israel has been, in its very short existence, since its declaration of independence, Israel has been involved in 10 wars, about one war every, I think, 7 years or so. And apart from the Suez crisis, all of these have involved her neighbors trying to not only invade Israel, but to destroy Israel, to drive the Jews from that part of the world. And Israel, extraordinarily, a small country, has managed on every occasion, to prevail. She has the most magnificent military forces, and she has an enormous intelligence operation behind that. She has an advanced economy. She would be a model for this country, but our governments don't seem to see that what she has done is something which should be imitated elsewhere in the world, particularly in this country where we are so rich in resources. We are not looking out. Our governments are not looking out for the future of this country, considering its enormous wealth.
Let me ask you about Anthony Albanese, because you name dropped him, Professor Flint, so I'm going to pick you up on that one. There has been a lot of quite justified criticism leveled at Albanese and his handling of Australia on the world stage, particularly the collapse and neglect of the Australian-American relationship. But we also have members of the Greens, members of the Independents, and also Labor MPs calling for things like America to be kicked out of Pine Gap. How stupid do the elected leaders of a country have to be to advocate geopolitical safety by kicking the world's most powerful military out of our most important strategic base in the north when we have no other defensive mechanisms, particularly at our disposal? Are you concerned that the people who run this country, Professor Flint, have no idea about history or about the realities of warfare?
I think you are absolutely right. Remember that Mr. Albanese went into the Labour Party and was in the Labour Party until he took the leadership in the hard left faction. Hard left in American is referred to as far left. In other words, that's the one which is closest to the old Communist Party, the very far left of the Labour Party, the hard left of the Labour Party, as is the Foreign Minister, Ms. Wong. Now, he said to the people from the hard left, after he was made leader on the basis that he was presenting himself as being more of the centre, he told them that when he's no longer Prime Minister, when he's no longer leader, he will return to the hard left. Now, there's a recording of that, which was mentioned on Sky. I think the Sydney Morning Herald had it. And he cannot deny that that is what he said. Now, this indicates that his worldview is not the worldview which the government portrays. The government pretends that it is a government of the centre. It is not a government of the centre. It is the furthest left government that this country has ever elected, and the people don't realise that they've elected a far left government. And that means that while they portray themselves as centrist, they are not interested in many of the things you would expect of a centrist government. Hence, the fact that they are not interested at all in the proper defence of Australia. They are running down the defence of Australia. Hence, they have an unusual attitude to the People's Republic of China, the Communist Chinese.
David, this Albanese government are the only communists in the world. that don't believe in having a strong military, as far as I can tell, because China is parading its military through the street. North Korea parades its military throughout the street. Every communist force in the world loves the military. Why are we stuck with a left-wing government that wants us to have no military?
Well, when the Americans asked us about 18 months ago to send send a Royal Australian Navy ship to the Middle East so that the squadron that the Americans had there, which was answering the Houthis, they are proxies of Tehran. They were terrorists who were terrorizing, firing on shipping in the Red Sea, and the Americans wanted to demonstrate that the West was united on this. The Albanese government refused. It was probably the first refusal by any Australian government to help the Americans. No wonder the Americans are suspicious of this particular government.
Let me ask you a controversial question, David. Amongst all ranks of politics, so not just the Greens who were shouting anti American slogans and wanting to shut down all of this and condemning America, not just the independents, but also there are many members of what we would typically call the conservative movement, whether they are coalition voters or they are in the other parties, and even leaders of some of the minor parties like the Libertarians and other such people have voiced an opinion that isolationism, pacifism, and staying out of global events is the best way to keep Australia safe, even to the point where some will say that not having a military or defence is the best way not to agitate nations such as China. So, what is your opinion about this idea in conservative circles, particularly, but also the left, that countries should stay safe by never engaging in these conflicts across the world, which, of course, America is trying to keep the world calm by heading off regimes like Iran, for instance?
I think, again, you're right. This will not achieve anything. Pacifism, which is all very well for someone in some religious order, is not something, or a Quaker. These are appropriate for those organizations which have those beliefs. Conscientious objectors, and the same. I have no objection to true conscientious objectors. But in the situation that we're looking at, when you come to governments, they have to take a position. And the position of an Australian government, and I think this is what the people expect, the position of an Australian government is that we have to be part of the Western Alliance and contributing to the formation of Western policy. But the idea that we should be isolated and have nothing to do will lead to our eventually being taken over. We must be an active member of the Western Alliance. And this, I fear, is something that Donald Trump will notice. He's no fool, and he's well informed. He will be informed about the ridiculous insults which have been poured on him by Mr. Albanese, and especially by his ambassador. Why he ever appointed someone with such a record as ambassador in Washington is very difficult to comprehend. As we all know, Mr. Rudd made some really outrageous statements.
And the coalition leaders have refused to respond to questions in criticising Rudd's appointment as ambassador, which is inexplicable, unless it's some kind of rule that I am unaware of where an opposition may not criticise the ambassador. Most people find it bizarre. And talking about pacifism, ask the English monks how well that worked out against the Viking invaders. That is what the reality is. Look, I've got time for one.
Wonderful example.
I've got time for one final question, David. I'm going to finish with your favorite, which is Donald Trump. And I'm going to be a bit sneaky with this one. Many famous conservative figures have been critical of Trump over the years. Some of them outright despise him, I believe it is fair to say. And I'm not just talking about the less adored leaders. Some of the most historic leaders don't like Trump. Do you think there'll be a change in the approach of these conservative leaders toward Trump should he be successful in achieving a peaceful outcome between Iran, Israel, and indeed Palestine, and perhaps the greater world order?
The Australian, before the election and during the election, was highly dismissive of Donald Trump. They even suggested that they seem to say, well, the Americans should have neither Ms. Harris nor Mr. Trump. Neither of them should be leaders of the United States. Now, there's a gradual change. For example, Mr. Sheridan, the foreign editor, over the weekend said that he didn't think that any other American president would have allowed Israel to have done what she did. Ronald Reagan brought down the Soviet Union without firing a shot. Donald Trump tried to do that in relation to Iran. He then did the next best thing, and the corollary of that policy of winning without actually fighting is to fight a clinical stroke, use a clinical strike into that country, do it in a very effective way, and completely achieve victory just by that act. And that's his approach. It's the corollary of the principle that the best form of soldiery, of strategy in relation to military is to win without fighting. Well, if you can't do that, do the next best thing. And what Donald Trump has done is the next best thing. I think he will be remembered, particularly as one of the great leaders of the Western Alliance.
Well, let's not forget one of his greatest achievements was the demise of the woke empire with a swipe of the pen in getting rid of the US aid. And that sent the Democrats into a panic and an existential crisis from which they have never recovered. So we may thank Donald Trump for that as it ricocheted around the world. And of course, it was the Spectator magazine where Professor David Flint writes, who had the best headlines and had faith in Donald Trump from the beginning, as particularly our editor-in-chief, Rowan Dean. Our support never wavered. We knew he would be the greatest president of the age. Thank you so much, David Flint, for joining us here today on Spectator TV.
And Alexandria, thank you so much for the opportunity.